let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, thank you so much for drawing each and every one here this morning. Thank you for those of us who have been here and been faithful to KMC for decades, and thank you for those of us who are new here, and maybe this is our first time here this morning. Lord, I thank you that we are all here. And Lord, I ask your blessing upon each and every person in this room this morning, that we may come to know you as we worship you through studying your word today. And so we ask this blessing in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, Exodus chapter 2. So we finished off chapter 1, and I didn't put this on the screen, but I just want to read like the last verse of chapter 1, right? Chapter 1, verse 22. This is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, ruler of the entire world is the idea in the Bible, right? He says, gave this order to all his people: every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. All right, that's how we ended up chapter 1. The idea there is that Pharaoh, as king of Egypt, is issuing an edict in his country and throughout the world that all Hebrew boys that are born must die, right? And they must die by being sacrificed to the Nile, and then we're going to take all the girls and we're going to marry them, and they'll become Egyptians, and the Hebrews will be no more, and then that means we rule, right? Because we're Egyptians, right? That's the idea. We get this? And so now we saw in chapter 1, we saw there were two heroes in chapter 1. You guys remember who they were? The two midwives. Thank you very much. Marina's paying attention. Well done. All right. And coincidentally, these midwives were the only people who were mentioned by name in chapter 1. Their names were Shiphrah and Puah, right? We don't mention Pharaoh's name. We don't mention any of the men's name. We just mention the women's name. Why? Because they're important and the men aren't, right? And that is absolutely the point that the Bible is trying to make. It's trying to tell us that the heroes of chapter 1 are Shiphrah and Puah, two women, two midwives, and God blessed them. And now we're getting into chapter 2, and what are we going to find in chapter 2? The heroes of chapter 2 are women, right? And so absolutely the Bible is trying to convey something to us by telling the story the way that it's telling the story. So let's get ready. Let's get into verse 1. It says, now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and we'll get their names later on in the story. They don't get named until a couple chapters later. That's Amram and Jochebed, right? And she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. And so under the edict of Pharaoh that all Hebrew sons must die, right? This man and this woman were more faithful to God's commands in their life, which was to what? Be fruitful and multiply. We're going to obey God. We're not going to obey man. That was their choice. And in doing so, to them was born a son. And now, because of the law of the land that they're in, they have a choice to make. Another choice to make, do they not? Do we obey Pharaoh, or do we continue to obey God with our actions? And so that's where we're at right away in these first couple of verses. Now, in verse 2 there, we see where it says, when she saw that he was a fine child. That gets translated a lot of different ways. So depending upon what version of the Bible you have, it might say that he was a handsome child, or a beautiful child, or a good child, right? And so the Hebrew word there is simply the word for good, right? And the implication is that he was that good in regards to God. Okay, so we saw that the child was a good, godly child. I think would be a better translation than a fine child. Does that make sense? And that's going to be important as we go through the story. And so we have this boy born, and we hid him for 3 months instead of doing what Pharaoh has told us we must do with this boy, which is to throw him in the river and let the crocodiles eat him, right? That's basically what the edict was. And so we get to verse 3. But when she could hide him no longer, right? Something must have happened there. I don't know why you can hide a baby for 3 months and then you can't anymore. We don't know. That's not the point of the story because the Bible doesn't tell us. She couldn't hide him any longer, so she got a papyrus basket for him, coated it with tar and pitch so that it was waterproof, right? She placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the banks of the Nile. So really, technically, she's obeying the law here, right? Sort of. Kind of, right? Except you're not supposed to make a basket and make it waterproof. You're just supposed to throw the kids in there. So she put her own spin on it. Why she got to this point, we don't know. But we do know that in doing so, she was making a huge sacrifice, was she not? How many mothers in the room? Now, I know that now your kids are grown up, you'll say yes to this. But how many, when your kids were still a baby, would throw them in the river if someone told you to throw them in the river? Yeah. Now they didn't get worse till they were older. You know that, right? And so, this woman was making a sacrifice. Now, whether she was told to by God or whether she was simply following the law of Pharaoh, the Bible doesn't tell us. But as we read the story and her other actions that she makes, I think that what she was doing was because she had faith that this would work out in the favor of the child, right? And as we see the story play out, I think we see that. And so her putting this baby into this basket and sending him in the river, I think is an act of faith. And I think that's instructive for us. How many of you live out your faith this deeply today? Yeah, I don't know that I could do that. And even now my kids are teenagers and I still couldn't do it, right? So it's a huge act of faith. Verse 4. And we see, here's another woman who's going to be a hero of the story. His sister, this would be his oldest sister. She probably would have been around 6 or 7 at the time. Her name was Miriam. We learn that later on. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe. So now we have the third woman in the story, the third hero of this early part of chapter 2. And she's going down to the Nile to bathe. This is normal. The Nile was the source of water. They bathed in it. They drank it. They used it for religious ceremonies. It was an important lifeblood of the culture, similar to other rivers in the world today. She went down to the Nile to bathe. Her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She had attendants because she was a princess, right? We get that, right? Princesses have attendants, I guess. I don't know. I've never been a princess. Don't laugh at me. It's true. And so, as Pharaoh's daughter, she saw the basket. She, being Pharaoh's daughter, saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it, right? Hey, what's that over there? Hey, you, go grab that thing, right? She opened it, she saw the baby, and he was crying, and she felt sorry for him. And here's the part of the story that's really interesting. She immediately recognized that this baby was a Hebrew baby. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. There was no mystery involved. There wasn't any, where did this child come from? There was, I know my dad said that all Hebrew boys were supposed to be sacrificed and thrown into the river. This baby is obviously Hebrew. He's in the river. So she knows exactly what she's doing at this point in time. And the interesting thing, one of the interesting things to me about this story is that Pharaoh's daughter, and he probably had many daughters, so this is one of many, but because of her position politically as who she was, as a princess of Egypt, she could, as a lot of daughters do, defy her father's edict and do whatever she wanted to, right? Other people didn't have that option. So if this baby had been found by a Joe Schmo like myself, right, I wouldn't have had any options there. I would have had to follow the law or get imprisoned or beheaded or whatever they did back then, right? But because of her political position and because of who her family was, she was able to see this baby, recognize what it was, and then take some steps that a normal person wouldn't be able to take. Verse 7, Well, before we get into that, and that is to keep the baby, right? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so she chose to keep the baby. And so we could look at this and we could say, wow, what a coincidence. Or we can look at this and we can say, wow, look at the hand of God at work. And I think that's what we're supposed to see here. God working through tragedy in order to try and get some good things going and try and get people to turn their hearts and their minds to him. And so his sister Miriam was there, asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Right? And I'm assuming she had an agenda at this point, right? She's probably a little sassy pants like many daughters are. And oh, I can find a Hebrew woman to nurse that baby for you if you want. Yes, go, she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother, who is whom? Jochebed, right? Who is the one who placed Moses in the basket to start with. And so Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Pharaoh's daughter said to Jochebed, take this baby, nurse him for me, and I will pay you. How many of you would like to get paid to raise your own children? That was an offer. You guys can pay me to raise anyone? Any takers? No? All right. Well, that's exactly what happened, though. Isn't that cool the way God works things out sometimes? Take this baby, nurse him for me. I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, we don't know how old. There's a lot of speculation out there. Probably at least a couple years, so probably toddler age. She took him to Pharaoh's daughter. He became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. The Hebrew word for Moses sounds like draw out, right? And so that's where the name comes from. And so that's the first part of chapter 2, right? We got Pharaoh, king of the world, saying, we got to kill all these babies. We got a woman saying, I'm not willing to do that to my child, but I don't have any other choice. Put him in a basket. I'm going to release now. Did she release the basket right next to where Pharaoh's daughter was bathing on purpose? I think so. Was she watching the palace to see when the daughter was walking down to the river to take a bath? I think she probably was. And that's why she sent her daughter with her. Now, did she know ahead of time that putting Moses in the basket and releasing him into the river was going to allow her to get her son back for a little while? No, she didn't. And so she was acting through faith, and through that faith, God worked some really good things out for her. And I know I've told you this, guys, before, but that works today still, right? As we're faithful to him, he works things out for us. And we're going to talk more about this as we go on. But I know a lot of us here this morning are kind of in some really terrible circumstances, right? Whether it be health-wise, position-wise, family stuff, friend stuff. I know some of us are really struggling right now. I get that, and I know that. And one of the things I would say to you that I think we can learn from this story, and I think the Bible tells us over and over again in multiple stories, is that as we're in our time of trial, God is with us. God is with us. And so if we maintain our faithfulness, he tends to work through that and work things out for good in our lives. Is it going to be how we want it to look? Nope, sure ain't. Why? Because you're not God and neither am I. But he's going to work things out to the best he can in an evil situation. And I think that's what's going on here. And we can see that God, as Jochebed was faithful to God, he was exceedingly faithful back to her, which is a beautiful and wonderful thing. All right, verse 11. Now, one day after Moses had grown up, how much time has gone by? Don't really know. But the Bible tells us in the book of Acts that it was 40 years. So between verses 10 and 11, 40 years has gone by, right? And so now Moses is a man. He's grown up. He went out, but if we read this, he sees that he is aware of who he is. He knows he's a Hebrew child, right? There's no I didn't know who I was stuff going on in this story. He went out to where his own people were, and he watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. So he recognized that an injustice was happening to his own people. Now, one of the things that Acts also tells us is that Moses was well educated, was strong, and was a warrior. Right? And so from that, we can assume that as the grandson of Pharaoh, right, which is who he was at that point in time, that was his family position, he had access to the best teachers, he had access to the best schools, he had access to the best of everything, right? Because Pharaoh's the king of Egypt, right? And yet throughout all of that, he still recognized the fact that he wasn't Egyptian, that he was Hebrew. And so one day he went out and he saw one of his fellow Hebrews being mistreated. Now here's where he starts getting into trouble, right? Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And so one of the things we learn from verse 12 there is that Moses was a man of action. He was impetuous, right? And he was also fallible like the rest of us. He knew he was doing the wrong thing. How do we know he knew he was doing the wrong thing? Because if we're doing the right thing, we tend to not do this, right? Which is exactly what the Bible tells us to do, okay? How many of you, when you're about to do the exact right thing, look over both of your shoulders and make sure nobody's watching? That's not how we act, is it? No, he knew what he was doing was wrong, was against the law, and yet he did it anyways. Now, he was motivated because of the injustice that he saw. And we see throughout the rest of chapter 2, he's motivated by injustice a lot, right? And that's a good thing. But just because we're motivated by good things doesn't mean our actions are good. And so, verse 13, the next day, right, he's going out to visit his people again. The next day he went out. He saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" Like, isn't it enough that all the Egyptians beat on you all the time? You got to beat on each other, right? The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us?" Which is ironic because he becomes ruler and judge over them, but that's later on in the story. We see here a basic rejection of Moses amongst his own people, whether they were rejecting him because he grew up in the palace, whether they're rejecting them because he didn't know them, we don't know. But we see Moses expected that his own people would accept him, right? And his people did not. They rejected him. Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian? Right? And then Moses was afraid and thought, what I've done must have become known. And this is a feeling each and every one of us is intimately familiar with when we did something wrong and someone finds out about it, and that first initial, I'm busted, right? You know what I'm talking about, yeah? That feeling, that's an awful feeling, isn't it? It's an awful feeling. And that's exactly what Moses was feeling here. And so what does he do? When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. Moses fled from Pharaoh, went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. He ran away. He got busted because he did something wrong, and he turned tail and he ran. Right? Now, that ended up being a good thing because the alternative was death. Right? And so when your life is threatened, generally speaking, the best thing to do is to go to a place where your life is not being threatened. And that's what he did, right? And so he ran away from that situation where he tried to step in to his culture and say, I'm here to help you guys out. I'm here to help against the injustice that you're experiencing with the Egyptians. His people rejected him for that, right? Pharaoh found out that he killed an Egyptian, and so instead of helping out his people, he ended up far, far away in a foreign land, right? And how many of you have ever been in a situation like that? You tried to do the right thing, you tried to help out, it backfires, and the next thing you know, you just have to get away from a situation like that, right? Yeah. I think as we go through the story, through the book of Exodus, we'll find that Moses is a very relatable character. So he sat down by a well. Now a priest of Midian, right? So he's in the land of Midian. Scholars are kind of split on where that is. Nobody really knows. Somewhere in the Sinai or Arabian Peninsula. We don't really know where Midian is. But a priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water out of the well that Moses sat at, fill the troughs to water their father's flock. This would be the only reason that daughters would be doing this was if that man didn't have sons, right, culturally. And so we're meant to see in there that this priest of Midian didn't have any male children. He only had daughters, right? Verse 17, some shepherds came along and drove them away. But Moses got up, came to their rescue, and watered their flock. And so wells were communal things that didn't belong necessarily to anyone. These women brought their flocks to the well to water the sheep. Why? Because if you don't water sheep, they die, right? And dead sheep aren't worth as much as alive sheep. Because they were, once again, we see this play between men and women, which we see throughout Exodus. Because they were women, men came along who were stronger and were able to push them out of the way and water their flocks. Moses, once again, jumps up at this scene of injustice and says, no, I will not let this stand. Very similar actions to what he did in Egypt. It didn't work out for him in Egypt. It works out a little bit better for him here. So Moses helps him out. Verse 18, the girls then go home they return to Reuel, their father, and we'll see later this guy is named Jethro. He's got several names. That's just kind of how it works back then. Like everybody had a couple different names, usually because people in the same area spoke a lot of different languages, and so their name would be one in one language and something else in another. So they returned to Reuel, their father, and their father asked them, why have you returned so early today? They answered, an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock. And verse 20, Reuel says, and where's this guy at? Like, this guy's a smart dude. He's like, I don't have any sons of my own. This guy sounds pretty good. Let's bring him into the household. Where's this guy at? Plus, in the Middle East, hospitality is a huge, huge thing, right? And so if someone does you a solid like that, you return the favor by inviting them into your home, providing them with a meal and whatnot. Where is he? Reuel asked his daughters, why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat, right? And Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. So the second time of trying to stop injustice works out a little better. First time, his life is threatened. He has to run away to a foreign country. Second time, he gets a wife. Well, there you go. That was my wife who said that, by the way. Take that, right? Anyway. Thanks, babe. And so it works out a little bit better. Standing up for injustice, sometimes it gets you in trouble. Sometimes it works in your favor. Verse 22, this is where we see some things change in Moses. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land. Now, we read this in English, and we're like, yeah, whatever. He names a kid a weird name, right? But this has significance for us because this part where it says, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land, the idea behind this is that I am a foreigner who's gone to another land to live forever. And so he names his kid Gershom as a reminder that though he's a Hebrew who grew up in Egypt, he's now going to live the rest of his life in Midian, and he's made his peace with that. Right? And so that's what that's what we should get out of that phrase. Like I said, in English it doesn't really translate all that, but in the Hebrew we really get that from that phrase. I'm going to live here for the rest of my life. It's not how I was born, it's not how I was raised, but it's the best that I can do for myself. I'm comfortable, I'm satisfied. This is now my life and will be from now on. How many of you have ever had similar thoughts to that? The last time I had a thought like that, within a year, God had moved us, right? My entire family to a different state, right? And so just be careful when you get to this point and we become really, really comfortable. And like, I'm satisfied here. I will take the goodness that God has given me here, and I'll just settle down and relax. That's not always how God allows us to work. Sometimes he sees us, he sees how comfortable we are, and he starts to push us. And we're going to see that here as we continue through the book. Verse 23, during that long period, well, how long of a period? This is the second time we see this, right? A long time went by between verses 10 and 11. Now we get to verse 23. Another long time has gone by. How long? Another 40 years, right? That's what the Bible tells us once again in the book of Acts. 40 more years goes by. He's established roots in Midian. He's got several children. He's got a wife. He's got a good job. He's got a good family. He's got a good thing going. Everything is fine and dandy with Moses. He doesn't need anything to change. He will die a happy man. But during that long period where Moses has taken his eyes off of Egypt and has settled himself into a different land, the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, died, and the Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out. And their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. And so as Moses has taken his eyes and forgotten the past, off the past, and focused only on where he is right now, the rest of his people are going through a much worse experience. And we see then in verse 24 and 25, God heard their groaning. He remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And so God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. And so the couple of key ideas here that are important for us to see. Number one is he remembered his covenant. Relationships with God are always through a covenant, right? And we see that throughout the Bible. We as Christians, we are in the new covenant. Our covenant with God is solely and only through Jesus Christ. And so as we give our lives to Jesus Christ, therefore we have a relationship with God. Right? Back then, God related to people through different covenants, in this case through the Abrahamic covenant, and God saw that his people were in a bad spot in Egypt, and he determined that he was going to do something about it. Now, verse 25 is interesting. We see it translated into English there. In Hebrew, it simply said, "And God saw the sons of Israel, and God knew." That's the literal translation. And God saw them, and he knew, right? And one of the things we need to recognize, if we're in a tough situation, if we find ourselves groaning before God. How many of you have ever found yourself groaning before God? I think I did it like a lot this week, right? When we find ourselves groaning before God, the first thing we need to realize and recognize is that God knows. God knows our trouble. God knows what we're dealing with. God knows the issues that we have in our lives. God knows that we're sick and we're dying. God knows that we're estranged from our family member. God knows that there's a decision we have to make and we don't know how to make it. God knows the trouble that you're in. And I don't know about you, but I find that incredibly comforting that I am never suffering alone. You are never suffering alone. Now, you might be suffering, but you're not by yourself in it. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I hope that you guys this morning can see that. The other thing I want to point out to you about this story, in Exodus chapter 2 this morning, is simply this, that a lot of time goes by, right, in these 25 verses. We've got 80 years that go by over the course of this time. The first 10 verses tell us about like the first year, right, the first couple years. And then we have a period of 40 years in which Moses grows up as a prince of Egypt. And then we have a period of 40 years as he is a shepherd. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, but the thing they teach princes and royalty are not the same thing they teach shepherds and nomads. Those are a different skill set. Yeah, agree? That makes sense? Right? What I need to know to herd a flock of sheep are not the same things I need to know in order to lead an army. Those are different skill sets. And one of the interesting things to me about the book of Exodus is as we look towards what happens in the future chapters, we see that Moses not only leads his people out of, I hope I'm not spoiling it for you. Moses not only leads his people out of captivity in Egypt, but then becomes the leader of the people who are nomads in the wilderness. And so he is being trained for the leadership role, and he's being trained on how to be a nomad in the wilderness here in chapter 2. And so even though some good and mostly bad stuff is happening to Moses here in Exodus chapter 2, what's really happening is that God is preparing him for the things that he is going to do in the future. And I know some of you here this morning might feel like life's not great right now. And it could be that God is preparing you for what he has for you in the future. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. Only God does. But I know that in my own life, as I look back on my own life, ministry, like being a pastor, this is like my third career, right? I've bounced around a lot. And every skill that I've learned in my previous careers, I have used as a pastor. And so I thought a lot of those years were wasted, and yet every year I find out more and more how much God was preparing me over the course of 20 years to step into the role I have today. Now, you're not me, I get that, but I'm not very special. We know that, right? And so if God is willing to use my experiences to prepare me for what he has for me, and he's willing to use Moses' experiences to prepare Moses for what he has for Moses, it just may be that he is willing to use your experiences to prepare you for something that he has for you. And so life goes kind of like this, right? We have our ups, we have our downs, we have our ups, we have our downs. And we see here in Exodus chapter 2 that Moses is being prepared in the downs, and he's being prepared in the ups to accomplish wonderful and amazing things for God. And this morning, I am fairly certain that there's at least one or two people in this room who God is actively working in your life to prepare you to do something amazing for him. And so when we're in the downs, take a moment and thank God for what you're learning in this rough patch of your life. And we're in the ups. Take a moment and thank God for giving you all the wonderful things that he's giving you, because both of those situations, no matter where you are in life, God is using those situations to change you, to prepare you, and to give you the tools that you need in order to get through what he has for you in the future. Does that make sense? And so all we really need to do then is to trust and to be faithful and to accept that the situation you're in, although maybe not ideal, is a situation that God is going to work on with you to make you the person that he wants you to be. And I think that's an amazing thought. Because frankly, I spent a lot of years trying to become the person that I wanted to be, and it didn't work out so good. And maybe you're still in that boat. Maybe you're still trying to become the person that you think you should be. And I would encourage you to let go of that. I would encourage you to let go of that and simply submit yourself to Jesus Christ. and allow Him to make you the man or woman that He wants you to be. I guarantee you, your life is going to take a turn for the better. Amen? All right, we got one more song for you this morning. We're going to continue worship. And of course, we got lunch afterwards. But let's go to the Lord in prayer, shall we? Father, thank you so much for your blessings in our lives. Thank you for the times in our lives when we don't see you. Thank you for the times in our lives when we do see you. Thank you for the good times, and thank you for the bad times. Thank you that no matter what we're dealing with, your Holy Spirit is there, is working in our lives, and is helping us to overcome our circumstance. Thank you for our circumstances that are preparing us for the future that you have for us. Lord, help us to embrace it. Help us to not shy away or run away from it. Help us to be faithful, that we can be yours. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Yeah, you're like, I don't know about that.
I don't know what they do back there. And I never will.